Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, the #1 procurement podcast where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all 3 to 7, whichever you're listening on. On today's episode, Alan, we're going into not only a black box, but the black box with another version of how it's sourced. So today we'll go through the history. We'll dive into how it's sourced and what it's made from and the different parts, talk through on the back end category management of this. And what really spurred the idea for this one, Alan, was the flight crash that happened in India about from where we're at about 1 to 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of conversations anytime the unfortunate event that something that a crash happens. There's just a lot of conversation around the black box. So we're gonna dive into how it's sourced. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of our street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a little company that we call Summit.
Let's get into it. All right. So first things first, Alan. You're the history guy here today.
I picked up the history piece on this one, and it's quite interesting, fairly clean. But there's the obligatory thing that we have to say at the very beginning of this podcast, which is the black box. It's neither black nor is it a box. Neither thing is true. It's a box in some distorted story of what it looks like. It doesn't look like a box, and it happens to be not black but orange. So one of the more interesting fun facts. Tom, do you know how it got its name, the black box?
I was in my research, I happened upon a few things. However, I'm not sure, Alan, if there's any conclusive decisions here.
Oh yeah, there is.
There is? Sure. Okay. I've heard there's not.
During World War II, when kind of aviation history was being made, there were a number of new technologies being inserted into planes to make them super aviative. And everything that got inserted, of course, was triple top secret. So they put it in a black box. And so they would talk about this black box coming in, bringing radar, this black box coming in and bringing something else. So I think it was just a parlance that was used in the aviation industry. And when they put these flight recorders in, flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders in, they just called it a black box, even though it's not black and it's not shaped like a box. So I think that's pretty conclusive. It's just another advancement that was put into planes.
Yeah, it is. It's funny just how things become, what they're said to be in people's minds. Like no one really generally Google, except for folks like us. Like, what is a black box? Like, oh, it's orange. It's like it's the color, right? Like,
it's interesting. Yeah. So that's the story behind the name, the black box. And a black box is actually composed of two different things. It's composed of an FDR, a flight data recorder. So think about this being the part that captures everything that's on a gauge, everything that's measuring pressure, temperature, speed, torque, anything in a plane that you would want to pick off of an instrument. So that's a flight data recorder plus a cockpit voice recorder. And that's actually the audio from inside the cockpit, so that you can understand what the pilots are thinking, how they're communicating with each other, and what their general sense of what's happening is. The history of this goes back not quite to the beginning of aviation, but pretty early on. So the 1930s and 40s was when the first quote unquote black box was built, and it was built in France. Reminds me of our tennis racket episode. It was built in France, and it was called the Husinograph. It used photographic film, get this, with mirrors and light beams to read instruments. So it actually was some sort of a camera that just looked at instruments, and it put those kind kind of those images on photographic film, and later on was putting those images on metal foil and putting readings on metal foil. So the earliest days, the 1930s, 40s, pretty primitive. I mean, the only thing I didn't read in my research was stone tablets, but it was pretty close.
Be tough to get some
then,
things off, in the emergency, like a chisel and stone.
It's right, exactly. So the real advancement in black box technology, kind of that inflection point, happened in the 1950s, and it happened in Australia. So in 1958, the first true black box, which was again these two parts, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, was put together, and they used magnetic wire spools to capture both of those elements, the flight data and the voices. And this happened in Australia. It was a guy by the name of Dr. David Warren. He's kind of thought of as the father of the black box. And the Brits so loved what he was doing that they partnered up with him in the 60s. And they kind of, the first rudimentary commercially available black box was this thing called the red egg. So now we're starting to, that's probably a little bit more accurate description.
It's almost as if all this is always brandings, right? The red egg,
it's exactly
the black box.
The red egg. Right, the red egg. And it used, because this was now the 60s, they were able to incorporate magnetic tape. So, Tom, you're too young to remember it, but I grew up with cassette tapes. I remember
not too young to remember it, Alan. I was, unfortunately, I had some road trips where I was like listening to the radio and then waiting for the song to come on to then press record, of which you only get, you miss the first 10 seconds. Yeah, it was pre-Spotify days for sure.
And you put together your first mixtapes, which are lots of fun. I could bring in mixtapes. We could do a whole episode on mixtapes. Maybe we'll do a whole episode on cassette tapes next time.
Maybe. It might be tough to source, to be honest with you, Alan. It's like there's impossible tasks.
Not made anymore. So the 1960s brought us kind of this first commercial red egg with magnetic tape. The 70s ushered in the digital era. So now we start to have printed circuit boards, and we have the ability to record things digitally. And then the 80s and beyond is really what brought us up to modern day. We took the digital components of a printed circuit board and made them solid state. So they weren't just PCBs, but they were built into transistors that are super rugged and highly efficient. And that's what really allowed us to kind of make leaps and bounds in the era of the black box. Let's see. So as far as the regulation around when these things really started to appear in planes, in June 1960, there was a crash in Australia. And Australia was actually, Australia features prominently in a lot of this history of the black box, not just through Dr. David Warren and his incredible innovations, his kind of his insights into how to put these things together initially, but they had the first big crash that forced the government to develop some legislation to say, hey, let's really try and get these into all the planes. And that was in early 60s, but by the end of the 1960s, almost every other nation had followed, and there was some degree of regulation in almost every country saying these black boxes needed to be included in at least planes over a certain size or planes over a certain capacity. And the first black boxes that regulations forced into planes were typically recording things on the order of 30 minutes long. So think about the cockpit voice recorder recording voices 30 minutes long. That has since grown now in the modern era up to 25 hours. So not only are you capturing every single sound that's heard in the cockpit for this flight, but you're probably capturing it for the last 3 or 4 flights. So you can really get a sense, was there something that happened earlier that we should pick up on that might lead to us understanding why this plane crashed today?
Yeah, and I didn't go into this. I actually couldn't find it. Maybe if I searched a little bit harder on this one. But do they just like reboot it at some point? Does it overwrite itself? Is that kind of how it does?
That's exactly right. It just overwrites itself. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, there was in the very first, like, why did it take until the 1960s and really early 70s before this became regulatory and mandatory. It's interesting to understand the history of it. It wasn't because of materials technology or electronics technology. It was more driven by privacy concerns. So the pilots themselves said, we don't want this recording our voices. So the earliest ones of these that were 30 minutes long had a button that a pilot could press when he wanted to erase it.
Oh yeah,
And they very quickly figured out, no, we're not going to allow that to happen.
yeah. Kind of defeats the purpose.
Kind of
If you
defeats.
just
Yeah,
delete
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Yes. So that was the Cockpit voice recorder, now recording up to 25 hours. The first flight data recorders in those early days were basically measuring 4 to 6 basic parameters of the plane, whereas up to modern day today, you are really recording up to thousands of different parameters of the plane.
Yeah, it's
Thousands.
crazy. Yeah.
Every second. So you really are literally understanding what's happening with that plane every second that it's flying, which is hugely beneficial to try and figure out why this thing fell out of the sky. So that's kind of where we are up into modern day. Some of the things that are changing and innovations that are coming with the black box. There's a big push for underwater locator beacons. So there's some interesting developments happening there. You might remember the Malaysian flight crash that happened in 2014, where they weren't able to recover the black box. So still a pretty big mystery. That had an underwater locator beacon that was pinging for 30 days, but the requirements then were only 30 days. So they weren't able to, the clock ran out before we were able to find that black box. Nowadays, the ULBs, the locator beacons, are required to ping for 90 days. So hopefully that won't happen again. The other thing that's interesting, we can now incorporate video. So there's some notion, again, with privacy concerns, some notion of can we get some video in the cockpit, maybe some video from other parts of the airplane. There's the notion of an ejectable floating black box. This is kind of one of the latest innovations that's happening. So right before the crash happens, kind of picture an ejection of the black box happening. So it doesn't itself crash, but it takes a little bit more of a soft landing, and it might be more findable because it's floating on water. And then finally, the biggest innovation nowadays is direct streaming of all of these data elements up to satellites, so that in real time you're getting data, you're getting audio recordings, and were the plane to crash, you don't have to go find a black box. It's in the sky now.
Yeah, which feels right? Like if you go on, not that it always works, but you go on and there's Wi-Fi on the plane. You have these Starlinks. You see people bringing a Starlink on board, and then it just kind of hooks up and runs at whatever gigs. Feels kind of easy for that to be done. And then you have unlimited storage once it's the satellite and goes into the data center, right? Like essentially unlimited storage.
That's right. So maybe just to round out this history section, maybe I'll highlight a couple of the historic crashes that really, where the black box was featured most prominently. The earliest use of a flight recorder in a crash investigation was the Stockport air disaster that happened in the UK in 1967. And there was a plane that crashed at the Manchester airport, and that was carrying one of these flight data recorders, and they were able to figure out that the aircraft suffered from fuel starvation. So it was really pilot error, and they were able to come up with some safety countermeasures to prevent that from happening again. Now fast forward about 10 years. This was in Spain at the Tenerife runway collision. This is considered to be the deadliest aviation accident in history because it involved two huge planes that collided on the runway in fog. And the cockpit voice recorder captured all the elements of the crash from both of the flights. And there was some confusion. One of the captains was initiating takeoff without getting clearance from the tower. They used kind of non-standard language. They were having badinage back and forth, casual conversation back and forth. So it really forced, this is 1977, it really forced some new regulation around how you communicate with the tower, how you communicate internally inside the cockpit during takeoff and landing. Some things that really, and they came up with some standard verbiage. So the example that was given was they would typically say, "We're going," or "Ready for departure,"
Hmm.
instead of what's now considered to be standard language. So my kid's learning to fly. These are the standard terms that he uses. Ready for takeoff.
Hmm.
That's the accepted terminology. Then let's go forward almost another 10 years. This is considered to be the worst single aircraft accident in all of aviation history. There were 520 fatalities on the Japan Airlines Flight 123 in 1985. And this was a pressure failure in the bulkhead, lost and caused the plane to lose tail control. And so there were a bunch of, I would say, physical and kind of maintenance safety procedures that were put in place because of the data that was taken out of that black box. And then finally, we already made reference to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 that crashed in the Indian Ocean. This is called the one that got away because we didn't have a black box to tell us what happened here. And this, I would say, rather than impacting elements of aviation safety, this was the big crash that really drove a lot of the improvements in the black box itself. So some of those things that we talked about, some of those innovations were really spurred on by this particular crash. So that's a few to kind of give you a taste of where the black box has been featured and one where it wasn't. Tom, what do you got to tell us about sourcing?
Yeah, well, I think just on that, the just that Malaysian crash, I just remember that also without the information, a lot of decisions were made too, right? It may have improved the black box, but there was a lot of like Boeing. It was a new that was the Max, right?
Yeah, I
The
think that's right.
airplane. Yeah, so that was like it was a new plane, and then had a bunch of
777. Yep.
had a bunch of different electronics in it, and then it was is it the software? Is it a software? Is it a pilot error? It was a lot of those things. So when something just disappears, you lose a whole entire story, which is just the
Mm-hmm.
what these black boxes provide.
Yep.
So then how it's sourced, what goes into this darn thing? So there's kind of four areas I'd say from a sourcing perspective. You have the one, which is this super strong shell on the outside that protects it, right? Then you have this fireproofing blanket, so which can keep it from I think it's up to some like 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,000 degrees ish Celsius. Then you have the memory chips, all the electronics, and then this underwater pinger, which you're talking about here, Alan. So
Mm-hmm.
to go the next step deeper into those, the shell itself is it's a metal casing, so it's generally like this corrosion resistant type stainless steel and or titanium alloy. So titanium alloy is the one that's like it's like a mixture of things, with titanium being a strong piece of it. So that's 6 to 12 times stronger than stainless steel with
Amazing.
and something like that. That's what really protects it, right? If you have a 777 or 737 flying down and just hits water, which is essentially just like hitting the ground anywhere else going at that speed, it's unbelievable these things are able to resist anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that titanium alloy, that's kind of the most rugged, and it's what gives it its strength and toughness. So then, when you go, right after that crash, then you have this thermal insulation layer, and this is there's a few different companies that provide this. Morgan Advanced Materials, Thermodyne, which I'm familiar with for other things, Microtherm, which is ProMat. So, like I was saying, these things can sit in a fire that's 1,100 degrees Celsius or 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour, just without burning. So something could happen to that titanium, essentially hits. It could just sit there cooking at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius for an hour. That's also unbelievable. You would assume that it would go out within an hour, and it's probably the reason why, or they do something else for it. But
Yeah,
that's kind of that
the metal won't melt at that temperature, but certainly all the sensitive electronic innards would,
yeah.
if not for this thermal blanket.
Imagine you have then the layer down. You have this housing and ceiling on the inside, which kind of holds stuff together. But that electronic
Mm-hmm.
core, like you're saying, just think of like a hard drive you might have sitting on your desk, or a thumb drive, like melts
Mm-hmm.
fast. Like imagine the
Right.
insulation protecting the insides of that. It's incredible. So but just going sort of stepping to the inside of it. So I said the outer casing, this thermo insulation layer. You have the inner housing, which is next in the ceiling. So there's an aluminum housing that it holds together the memory boards and the hard drive, all that kind of stuff. Um, and it keeps it watertight. So if something were to happen on the outside, a little bit of a puncture, and then it goes through the insulation layer, this is something that would keep it watertight. And I think it can go down to 20,000 feet for 30 to 90 days, essentially staying watertight. Like, I mean, that's amazing. And that was the average depth. This might be just like, Quizzo answers you might have, Alan, but the average depth is 12,000 feet. Yeah, that's
12,000.
Yeah, 12,000.
Like 2.5 miles.
Yeah, and this can go 20,000. So if it's going to hit any average depth, it'd be okay from this perspective, at least from a
Marianas
water tightness.
Trench.
Yeah, that's
Marianas
deeper,
Trench.
right? That's the
I
think that's the most deep. Yeah, in the ocean.
Look up for us the depth of the Marianas Trench. We've got a special guest producer, Shubham, with us today. So
yeah, so my quick Googling, 35,000 feet.
Ooh,
yeah, sorry, Shubham. Yeah, I'm always at the ready at the keys there. So then we go down next level, right? So now you're at that watertight inside the insulation, inside that protective layer. So then you have the things that you reach into to understand what happened. So you have memory in there, and Shubham, I think something you can, if you want to pull up the pictures of the of one of these not black boxes, but you have the memory. So here's the picture of it, Alan, which is just, it's orange. Amazing. Maybe Shubham, if you can go over to go to the one that's like the inside. I mean, that one's good. There you go. This one. I mean, it's just a circuit board. So you basically have like this circuit board computer inside of this casing. So you have all of your memory. They use this. Is it NAND or is it NAND flash memory? So chips, just like just like your hard, your hard drives. So but then they imagine the thing's going to be like driving whatever speed and hitting the ground. It has to have everything connected to it like 100x stronger than you would something that's just sitting on your desk all day. Because I think both, like, I've dropped a computer before, it does not hold up on the inside, right? And that's just like going from
the
3
phone.
feet. Yeah, your phone. Yeah, that does not hold up a few feet. No. Yeah, you see the people with the rugged cases, and they don't always even hold. So this is just like the next level of any of this. So, and also needs to.
On this one, you can see the stainless steel outer, and then you can see that thermal blanket. It's fascinating.
Yeah. This is sort of like the cylinder. If you have a cylinder standing up, kind of top looking down to take off the top. It shows how it's all in there, and it just looks. I mean, it just looks like kind of a rubber gasket there, but yeah, it's just. I'm sure it's tightly wound, tightly packed for max protection there. So yeah, you have all this inner workings, this super electronic core, and then you just have the things like you were saying, Alan. You have this beacon, which can now will go up for about 90 days. The recorder, you have its own separate power supply and different connectors, everything attached together. So as I started going through and doing a cost buildup of this, and I don't know if the numbers are going to be right, but I think a lot of it has to do, as I go through it, there's going to be a heavy markup on the make it rugged, get to standard side. And this happens with projects all the time. Folks will go through and do an estimation, and then it's 2x because they don't take that into account. But I'm going to give it a shot here. So on the direct material side, first off, you have the crashable survivory memory unit. So the memory itself, which should be about $1,400. So how I get to that is you have this, it's like the casing called like $800 to $1,000, and then the thermal insulation itself, maybe about $400 to $500, $600. So that's kind of the CSMU, that outside casing. Then you have the electronics core, which would be another $1,450. So just assume, I mean, this could easily be more though. I just want to caveat this. And then you have your support systems, tying all that stuff together. That needs to be next level protection as you're doing all the circuits, probably making it extra strong, extra thick, et cetera, et cetera. So the direct materials as you go through is about $1,400, $1,500 for the memory unit, the about $1,500 for the electronic core, and then another $3,300 to $3,500 for this support system stuff. As you could say, that's materials is that, the direct labor about half. So for this would be about $3,300, and that's just it's just a build up. So say it takes about 30 hours for like one skilled technician and testing to go through $110 an hour, $100 an hour. You can get to 3,300, right? 3,300.
Yep.
Then you have overhead associated with this, call it another 4,000, and then that makes your total cost of goods sold, call it anywhere from like 13,000 to 20,000 is
Amazing.
about, yeah. So, but then these things retail. So just, and I shouldn't take at like they also there's SG&A, which is your sales, general administrative costs, as well as R&D, tack on another $2,500 or something, right? So just say we're at about $16,000 baseline, maybe 20, 25,000. These things retail. I saw 3 different ranges, Alan, for these. There's also an oligopoly. So if you're a plane manufacturer, you have about 4 companies, 3-4 companies to go to. So for this, I saw for some of the smaller ones, looked like these things could go for 20,000. Therefore, it'd be a lesser unit than what I just saw, what I just walked through. But for the standard, it is anywhere from like 40 to 60, maybe 70K. And then I saw some on the upper bounds. Maybe it's for the larger Boeings or something where maybe those I saw like 88,000, some were like $100,000. Some was 150. So in some ways, maybe it's just where you get your information from. But there's heavy markup. And I would expect a lot of that heavy markup within my math. If it's a $16,000 unit and it sells for 55,000, it'd be a markup of 130, 140%. So, which leads to a decent profit margin or operating profit margin. But again, when I've been on some like capital builds and you don't realize the regulations you need to go through and like the differences versus standard, especially I'm certain for something like this, that just tacks on costs. And it's that point where you just need to start talking to the manufacturers, right? If you're going to buy a bunch.
Yeah, this is the cost of a nice car, right? A nice car up to a true luxury vehicle, all for something that could sit on your desktop in your office. It's pretty amazing. But I also think they're probably making only a few thousand units per year. They're not making a bunch of units per year. So, and every single unit, this is the no single failure allowed, right? Every single unit has to work.
So 100%. Nothing. You're out of business if one ever messes up.
That's exactly right. So that's a fascinating side to it. And I hadn't really thought about the cost. I didn't think about it being this expensive. But like the planes that my kids flying, the little Cessnas or the Pipers, those are $60,000 to $100,000 planes. This takes it right out of the league of that. I would guess that what he's flying doesn't have a black box, or if it does, it's only incredibly rudimentary.
Yeah, and you're right on a quick Google led me to see roughly 1,000 commercial jets are sold and delivered annually. So maybe these also need to be repaired, and maybe I don't know what the warranty is on these things. They need to be changed out. But yeah, Boeing had about 500, Airbus about 600, private jets were like another, call it 800. So other aircraft 2,000. So what? Maybe like 3,000 aircraft or something per year. Total.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. So then, Alan, so that's where we're walking through. I think just one other piece was like the data as a service. You kind of touched on that. Will these things be needed? Will they just be a backup in the future? We'll see. But if Teslas send all of your information all the time to a data center, it feels like an airplane could too. But from a category management standpoint, what are your thoughts, Alan, on this?
Yeah. So if I were the category manager putting these things together, obviously now, unlike our last 6 episodes where we focused on golf balls and tennis rackets and, soccer balls, which were lots of plastics, lots of specialty plastics and other materials. Now we're kind of into what I consider to be my strike zone. Like I love metals, metal forming, machining, and this is a lot of machining. So, you think about who can make the metal housing for the black box. with the exception of the titanium piece, which is super specialized, but it's not even that super specialized. There are plenty of manufacturers of titanium. You could find somebody to machine these outer elements to the black box. They're a dime a dozen. So I think, were I the category manager, I would be really pushing hard on that outer housing to drive some savings, because probably this industry developed where these are made down the street, so you go to your guy down the street. But now we have a huge competitive global network of manufacturers that can make this, and that one part of it, that one component of it, was easily 10 or 15% of the overall cost. Obviously, the memory unit, you think of all the manufacturers who could do that, but now we're starting to get into specialty electronics, the PCBs, because these have to be ruggedized. And I would bet the universe of suppliers gets pretty small for those things. So that's why I think I'd pick on the metal and some of the aluminum and some of the thermal blanket.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the regulation on these things is so high that even if you want to just stand up a new supplier and just kind of like give a little piece, give them a test shot, the amount of work that company would need to go through, there already need to be a giant company in order to handle it, and probably have the relationships in place with so much of this. I'm not certain, but I'd lean towards certainty, goes through the FAA, right? Where it's like they're only approving a certain number of suppliers, and if you F up, it's on you. We're going to come after you for billions, right?
Oh yeah.
So the risk reward is just so out of balance there.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, the casing, just working with the suppliers, this is one where having a good relationship with them is probably just also very beneficial.
Yep.
But it goes both ways, because there's also only so many manufacturers of airplanes, and there's only so many manufacturers of these type black boxes, that there is a give and take. If the Boeing or Airbus says, I want to pay less, they're going to pay less some way, right? They're kind of like the only buyers. So you do have a lot of hand on probably on both sides, but still, if you're one of the few airplane manufacturing companies that's approved, you do have a lot of hand you can lean into and with. So, yeah.
That's another one in the can, Tommy. On behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tom Finn, the guy who puts the fin in finance, and your OG of procurement, the old guy, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.